Amazing. So thanks everyone for joining. We are really, really excited actually to have this conversation. First of all, you are diving into from data to discovery, rethinking research in women's health. So I'm joined by Danika Kelly from MyNormative, from Dearbhail Ormond, from Frendo, and myself, Amy, from Hello Inside. And we are going to jump right in. So thank you for joining us for the conversation. We're basically here because something important is happening. You know, women's health is finally being taken seriously. We're not just in the clinic rooms, but actually being taken seriously in research labs, in tech development, funding conversations as well. And, you know, we want to use this conversation today to change that and shift the conversation a little bit. So not from fear, but just to transparency and making sure that we're using ethical and user-led design, you know, based around and for and serving women. And we want to go from invisibility in research to evidence-based empowerment. So you'll hear from the three of us today. We are powerful voices and we're working at the forefront of this change. So together we are here to ask today, what happens when women own their own data? And what if we use it to change the system from the inside out? So let's begin. We'll start with a short introduction from each of you. So Danika, maybe we lead with you. So what does your work focus on and what drew you personally to the mission in women's health?
But thank you for having me. And for those in my time zone, very good morning. It's 8 o'clock here, so please excuse me while I have my coffee and water on hand. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. The organization that I co-founded is called MyNormative, and MyNormative is focused on addressing the sex and gender data gap, which it sounds, I'll say, very fluffy if you don't think about kind of what that means and how that means. And this is super, super meaningful, I think, to both of my co-panelists here in terms of my co-founder and I both specialized in different areas of health. Mine, not physiologically female specific, but my co-founders was, and I tried to at some point focus on the female body in human performance and could not because of the legacy data. And my co-founder was in a female specific oncology space, and the data still didn't account for sex as a variable in a meaningful way. And so this became a really obvious thing to me, where it was a data gap that existed not just in reproductive health, not just in metabolic health, not just in neurological health, but in every health vertical. So MyNormative is a health research and innovation platform meant to help you no matter where you are sectorally, kind of as far upstream as we can get on the data collection and data management side so that the gap does not persist. And in terms of why, I think naive feminist rage is probably something.
A bit of that.
Yeah, so I can do something about this, and then I'm like, oh no, I'm doing something about this. So 5 years on, it's going well for sure. Thank you for having me.
Amazing to have you, Dearbhail.
How exciting, Danika. Yeah, thank you, Amy. My name is Dearbhail Ormond. I'm the founder and CEO of Frendo, which is, it was the first mover endometriosis app on the market. We launched about 4 years ago. We have a B2C offering in app stores, and then we have a B2B offering, trying to support both employees and employers around endometriosis. I suppose I created Frendo after years of living with undiagnosed endometriosis, stage 4. Like a journey that involved mistrust in my own body because I just didn't know what this pain was. The misdiagnoses added to that lack of trust I had. And again, just feeling dismissed more times than I can even remember. I suppose Frendo was that means to, or that thing I always wished I had as a teenager, really, that would help me articulate how I was feeling and help get doctors to listen and validate my symptoms and track patterns and really empower and advocate for myself. So I think this is a really, really timely discussion. around the positivity of protected user-led data, really. And there's lots of it out there.
Yeah. I think it's sad to hear, but actually, you know, we need people, and women specifically, to be that first mover and say, I'm actually sick of this. I'm sick of having no solution. I'm going to go and solve it. Not just on my own, but with the whole movement as well. And I think that's what's really powerful about the space that we're working in, is super collaborative. But right, in terms of my world as well, a little bit different journey. So I studied medical science degree at uni, and you know, also had this sort of the women's health journey of undiagnosed and dismissed, everything sort of going through that journey, and you just get frustrated. And I decided to be one of these first movers in studying the women's health industry. So coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective to setting up a business, but actually, you know, I've ended up here as well, and I'm really happy to be working with Hello Inside, because what we're doing is basically using glucose, continuous glucose monitoring. So I'm tracking right now, of course. We use continuous glucose monitoring to help as a biomarker for people, but particularly women, understand their bodies better by visualizing, you know, what does glucose as a biomarker tell you about how your sleep, stress, nutrition, and movement all play a role, plus also your hormones. Spoiler alert. So, you know, women have got something a little bit different here. But right, if we jump into theme one, you know, there's a few themes I want to cover in this conversation that, to keep it a little bit structured, because I know that we can deviate and talk about women's health forever. So I guess the first theme would be, you know, the gender health gap. This is real, this is deep, this is costly, you know, not in terms of just financially, but also costing time, costing health to people in the world. So, you know, we know that the healthcare and research systems have historically been built around the data that exists. And we know that the data that exists is historically biased. So, you know, we've all heard the phrase designed for men and adapted for women. But, you know, we're not just small men, and that's also a sort of coined term that comes around. So from your perspective, what are some of the most harmful consequences of this legacy in health research or in clinical care? So maybe Dearbhail, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think this is becoming so much more evident now about, you know, clinical trials and how late they started and how crazy that is. You know, sorry, clinical trials, including women. And I mean, that has had huge ramifications on us as women. But I suppose endometriosis it's a prime example around this. And you know, 1 in 7 people with periods are now suffering from endometriosis. It still has no cure, no accurate and validated diagnostic test, and is severely underfunded and underfunded compared to conditions that affect fewer men. And I think it's also it's mainly why symptoms are, you know, like pain, pelvic pain and fatigue are dismissed as normal, you know, because that data is just not there, and, you know, or dismissed as psychological, or you're depressed. And I think the most harmful consequences of this health gap that is real and extremely costly is that women delay getting treated. You know, they go for, in particular with endometriosis, they go for years undiagnosed. I mean, the amount of people that I speak to who say, you know, I still wonder if it's endometriosis that I have, and they're almost conditioned to put up with that discomfort, or, you know, however it shows up in itself, whether it's pain, painful sex, just not feeling quite right, because the system was designed without them in mind. And so, yeah, it's really not just a data issue. It's a massive design flaw. And endometriosis is a perfect example of it.
Danika, what about in your end? How's that bias showing up in your field?
I think from like the, I don't want to call it like a user experience, from like the human experience side of it, I just want to really lean into what was just said at the very end, which I think really is the problem, is that we are conditioned to not see the problem. That is the biggest problem in my field. And so I'm going to tackle this from two sides, one from the human perspective in terms of those who experience the inconvenience, and then beyond that and how that impacts our ability to do research in the space. Mm-hmm. So I think from a conditioned not to see it, conditioned not to understand it, conditions not to trust our own body's perspective, I think that this is obviously terrible within the, I'll call it the domain traditionally associated with women's health. But at least in women's health, we know it exists, right? So when we talk about like what is the worst problem, I think the worst problem isn't what we know exists. The worst problem is what we don't know exists. And so when I kind of talk to people, I think I love to give examples of the fact that, and there's a famous one that I like to extend, which is like the crash test dummy was a small male that we modified for a female, right? Yeah. The problem is most women don't think of seatbelts as a women's health problem. But we are 90% more likely to have life ending and tragically altering outcomes from driving cars. But we don't think of it that way, right? And there are things within the car driving space. So now we've considered morphology, right? So like we consider that the female body often has a bust to hip ratio that is different from the male, et cetera. But we don't consider physiology. How does joint laxity in the female body change over time? And I want to just shout out to Michelle Oyen right now, Dr. Michelle Oyen. She's based in the US. She is studying the fact that we've never considered whether or not seatbelts, as they are currently designed, are safe for pregnant people, because they cut right across the most critical component of the body for reproductive health. And so all of this like day-to-day interactedness, the stuff we touch, our desks, our chairs, our shoes, our hats, that isn't actually designed for women or the female body, that we don't even think of as health. And when we talk about that like quality of life gap, women live longer, but they have worse lives. That's where I think the biggest, scariest opportunity is. And on the health research side, that means that we have an entire multi-generation deficit where we aren't even trained to think, when we build a table, how does this impact women's health? And so there's this huge epistemological way of knowing gap, and that I think is dangerous on both sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg if we look split by gender, right? If you're going sex, gender, and ethnicity and culture and you know, there's a whole way. It just kind of comes down to, we've built for one type of person that exists, and it comes down to personalized solutions, really, and thinking outside the box of not just, let's just design for the norm, which is not the norm. So I guess, yeah, you know, even in our area with Hello Inside, when we're talking about the gender health gap, I often get asked, you know, why should someone who's non-diabetic track their glucose? It's a good question, right? But in the end, when we talk about the women's health gap, actually, PMS is a metabolic disorder, endometriosis actually, polycystic ovary syndrome, 1 in 10 women have this, but 56% of women don't know. So that means 1 in 20 women are walking around with a metabolic disorder that could later on cause them diabetes, cause them heart problems, and cardiovascular risk increases. And if we could get in ahead of time as a preventative precaution, and you actually understood your body, not just what you're tracking, but how you feel as well, you know, all of this comes together. There's a gap, and we're trying to solve for that piece. But this kind of is a really good opportunity to sort of bridge to the second theme that I wanted to come to, which is like, what we don't measure, we miss. I mean, Danika, you already alluded to this massively, not just in healthcare, but everywhere around the world. Seatbelts, even if we stick to automotive, you know, the pedal, where the pedal is, where you're driving, is built for a man. So we have more accidents even when we're trying to press the brake. So what we don't measure, we miss. But if we keep this a little bit more in the health space, right, You know, female data, yeah, not just underrepresented, but also misunderstood and dismissed. I think one statistic that always stands out to me, I think it was only a couple of years that I learned this. We talk about a 28-day menstrual cycle as textbook. It's if you are taught about periods, even if you're taught about the menstrual cycle, it's always referred to as 28 days. I know that that's the average, but it's not the norm. But we refer to it, men refer to it, all colleagues and everything. And actually, only 13% of women have got a 28-day cycle. So even just that completely blew my mind. Over 80% of women are thinking that they're not normal, that they are other, that they're different, something's wrong. And we've not even been able to address that. So I'd probably put this one to you, Danika, since I know that this was something that came up when we were in New York a few weeks ago at CIS. So, you know, women are complex because we have hormonal shifts and cycles, you know, and it's seen as often it's seen as like a burden and not like an opportunity in research. So maybe you can describe a little bit how you're, you know, addressing this with MyNormative.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to point to the obvious one, which is the name of the company. We recognizing that very few people are the statistical average, right? That 10 to 15% window on a 28 to 32 day cycle. The definition of normal has now even changed in the last 5 years. I can tell you how much of a pain in the butt that's been on the data management side for another day. But what was really important to us, and I think Amy alluded to this earlier, which is like if it's participant or patient or person-led data capture, the big piece that needs to be an outcome of this is what is my normal, what is my normative, not what is the prescribed normative state of being, right? And so I think the big thing for us on an algorithmic side and a machine learning side was to design a system that was highly adaptive so that when somebody inputted data, we could min-max kind of what the hormonal state variability might look like to start to understand what their normal is. And I think I will give one example that I like to use on like how and why that's important, and then I'll lead into the data a little bit more. So within the MyNormative platform, we allow for self-reported wellness indicators, and this includes things like mood, motivation, self-efficacy. And one of the things that really kills me about like the public discourse on cycle syncing online is when people talk about points of high estrus being like these highly motivated states of being, and like you should be, this is when you're thriving, this is when you're pushing, this is when you're going to do really well, except dopamine, your happy hormone, and estrogen have a Goldilocks, like a U-shaped relationship, and they have a Goldilocks zone in them. And so if you're naturally high estrogen and then, or high dopamine, and then the estrogen pushes on it, it's going to push it out of whack, and you're actually going to lose self-efficacy, and you're going to lose motivation, you're going to lose the feel-good hormones as your estrogen rises. And so imagine if you have data capture that reinforces and gives only the option. So you say like, oh, I'm not feeling great today. And the feedback from your technology says, you should be feeling great today. You are in your like late follicular phase. And you're like, nobody just told you to feel bad. And then to the point you made, Amy, that means that you're reinforcing in 80% of the population that somehow their hormones are wrong, that somehow they're interacting with their bodies wrong. And so even the mechanism by which we capture the data and then relay that information back, not only to the participant, but then to the researcher or the clinician or whoever else might be monitoring that data, becomes really important that we're not accidentally biasing it with faulty practices from the outset, right? So I mentioned earlier that what we even define as normal over the last 5 years have shifted because we've been, as a society, doing more actual data capture on the menstrual cycle. And so now that means that when I export data to somebody, I have to restructure it to allow for a greater level of normal, which is really interesting. And these things are important because it changes who gets invited to participate in studies. So one of the biggest limits right now is that people only really want to study eumenoric, so regularly menstruating individuals, not on birth control, not postpartum, like they've got a whole litany of things. And I think the big exciting thing we're doing on the data capture side as we get more and more of this like self-report data and this participant data is that we're broadening our understanding of what is normal and therefore allowing more and more people to actually be represented in the data of the general population, instead of defining everyone as clinical as soon as they're off of that 15% mark. And that means that as we develop clinical insights from that data, we're going to have more impact because the data is going to be more representative of what the lived experiences of women and people with female bodies are. Sorry, that was a long answer.
It gives chills and thrills, right?
Yeah.
It's normalizing the normal is,
Yes,
it's not rocket science.
but it is, because scientists are trained to just get rid of anything that might mess with the clarity, right?
Yeah. And I mean, you both know this, but for maybe others on the call, women were only re-included in clinical trials since 93. And it's only been since 2016 that mice were needed to be included as mice models, right? So we're not even talking 10 years. And that's only mice models. That's not even the human capability. So yeah, it's crazy. Dearbhail, you had another comment here.
No, I was just going to say, it's so, like, I mean, hormonal cycles, pain patterns, perimenopause, I mean, these aren't rare, They're really a baseline for understanding over half the population. And yeah, it's just, it's bananas. And I think the data that we collect at Frendo, I always say, we're not a cycle tracker. We are a dedicated pain tracker as such. But the data that we collect, like everything from cycle patterns to pain flares to post-surgical symptoms, often or hasn't really existed in mainstream data sets. And that just reinforces these blind spots. Like we focus on areas from, pelvic pain, fatigue, brain fog, GI issues, flare-ups, medical events, this, hormone therapy, like all of these, a very wide lateral focus, and almost like a complete living health record, as opposed to, hey, I'm just tracking my period. And, it's so much more than that.
So much more than that. Exactly. So I guess, one of the ways of looking at that theme is, it's not that we're complicated. It's not that the female biology is complicated. It just has not ever been prioritized, right? And that's just a theme of our jobs and our industry as well, but also for this conversation. So, I mean,
I just want to lean into that. I saw a paper maybe a year and a half ago. I don't know. I recently had a baby, so like no one trusts my perception of time, but it was recent-ish. And it was a really great, I was by an endocrinologist, and what they were able to show, and it's like, I just need to go find this paper because I was heavily pregnant, and somewhere in my files, this endocrinologist was able to show that actually, and everyone can like take this and go home with it, but I'll find you the paper, because the female body goes through amenorrhea, it's actually more predictable than the male body. It's exactly less complicated. It's actually less complicated. The hormonal states are more predictive. They are more reliable. They are more cyclical, and therefore easier to interpret. And so this person wrote this beautiful paper basically being like, all of this language we have on how it's too complicated and too burdensome, it's an epistemological problem that we talked about at the outset, is that we've never trained ourselves to think about it. And so it feels complicated, but it's actually less complicated than measuring the male body.
Wow. I definitely want to get hold of that paper.
It just hasn't been prioritized. It's
That's
really
it.
not. Yeah.
No, exactly.
I love that. Yeah, I want to find that paper.
I'm so sorry, pregnant. And he was like, that's cool, and closed it. And I'm like,
I'm going to share that with my husband.
Really cool.
Hey, you're actually more complex than I am.
Very unreliable, those men.
I would say, just for those tuning in live with us, if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we can get to them. I know we're already almost half an hour in, so we'll power through the next sort of 3 themes. I'm really keen to get through these, just to bring the conversation really like forwards and future thinking. But the power of the right data, that's sort of the next theme, in terms of when women are measured, everything changes. Danika, you've already just alluded to MyNormative, and the new normal is actually a wider, more representative state, that we're not more complicated, we're almost more predictable. Music to my ears, you know. But data also doesn't have to be scary. And Dearbhail, I guess from your perspective, like what was an example, a recent example maybe of the power of what happens when there is the right data?
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to endometriosis because I think it is a powerful example. I think that, you know, for years, the lack of data meant a serious lack of urgency equals a serious lack of funding. But, you know, once we've actually started gathering data and you know, tracking the prevalence of it, then and really understanding this, you know, appalling diagnostic delay of, you know, 7 to 11 years on average. My own took 18 years. It's, I suppose, bringing that lived data to light, and we're beginning to see a shift. And I think, yeah, a really great example of this is I suppose this visibility helped, and it led to a $50 million philanthropic donation into the now called the Ainsworth Endometriosis Research Institute. I was hoping I would get that right. So yeah, I think, I mean, this is huge. I think I'm not going to go off track here, but the family of philanthropists who have donated it have made their money predominantly from gambling machines. And there's a little bit of backlash in the media in terms of, oh, really, you know, can we accept this money? And I don't know, that's for a whole other session. But it's also kind of like, well, where's the other money, you know? But I think it's a huge step forward. And this is a really powerful model, and it's recognizing that like longitudinal, real world and patient generated data is how we really move the dial. And this is a global institute as well, so it's not just Australia focused. Yeah, I think I'm really excited about it. You know, we're already talking about doing some partnerships with them, and this is, you know, yeah, I mean, if you don't have, if you can't measure it, then you can't treat it really, you know. And this is kind of where I feel like, not like data is the be all and end all, but it's so powerful. But you know, it's as we all keep saying, it's that protected consent-led data that will help us get from, you know, the pain that we've always had to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, also, if we just talking about measuring stuff, I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've got 2 wearables on. I've got a ring. I've got a watch. You know, we are now, you know, in this bracket of a society where wearables are really, really common, and they can, you know, you can track everything. You can really track everything. And here I am also tracking glucose, right? But the reason that I'm really excited about this is actually there's some equation here around not just outsourcing everything and measuring everything. You know, first of all, it's like, if we contribute our data in a consented way, we're helping bridge that gap, first of all. So it's like a feminist act to track anyways, I really feel. And I guess a second piece is, as a result of being able to track, you need to actually, the really important step is reflect on how you feel. So, you know, with glucose monitoring, for example, it's not just about that you had oat milk in your coffee in the morning, but actually, how did you feel the rest of the day as a result of being on a glucose roller coaster? What's the difference between the first and second half of your cycle? And actually, in the second half of my cycle, I know that I'm more insulin resistant, so I have to take care about what I'm eating, my stress levels, and that's actually as a result of having data available to myself. You know, we talk about being the CEOs of our own health. I feel really in control because I have data and I know how I feel, and it's all visible, right? And I know, Danika, you were talking about, MyNormative and cycle syncing, and it's talked about a lot, but it's actually not ever been studied. And I have to say, one of the pieces that we're working on is a piece of research with some amazing trailblazing companies in the US. So Elisa Vitti, who leads Flow Living, and also together with Miracare in fertility and hormone tracking, and Citrus Labs, that we're actually doing a first piece of research to prove out the sort of what does it mean to cycle sync for yourself with your own norm, and can you and does it improve your PMS symptoms, because we know that there's insulin resistance. So I'm really keen to see, when we actually research it, not just talk about it on social media, when we really research it, what does that mean and what are the outcomes of that data? So yeah, it doesn't have to be scary, but feminist act to track your data. And basically, yeah, just making invisible patterns visible so we can build better science and better care. Another theme that I want to sort of touch on is ethics, privacy, and trust. So, Dearbhail, this is one that we talked around a couple of weeks ago. With any movement that is gaining momentum, of course, we see growing scrutiny. We see people saying, no, are you sure? And just last month, especially in the UK, there was a new report that made the headlines, sort of saying they've got concerns about menstrual tracking apps, danger, women's health data is being used, maybe misused. And of course, like, those kind of fears are really, really valid. But because women's health has been overlooked, under-researched, underfunded, we also have to see it in a broader context. And, not all tracking is bad. Not all menstrual health apps are doing this. Not all women's health apps are doing this. So I guess more towards your side, Dearbhail, what is at risk if we let the scaremongering dominate the conversation? And how do we, as leaders in the ethical femtech, like, how do we reframe this narrative?
Yeah, I think it's important not to, I try not to focus on the negative here. But, I think the fears around data misuse are, they're valid and they are real. I think, but women's health has been just overlooked for so long and exploited, actually, for so long. But yeah, by lumping all femtech into one category, actually is risking us being set back again. And, as you said, not all tracking solutions or tools are exploitative. For many people with periods and women, tracking and it is really the only way that they can advocate for themselves and feel heard. So I think, yeah, there's a real fear, or there's a risk if the fear dominates, that like women then disengage, right? We become fearful again and we stop tracking, and then we lose visibility into these conditions like endometriosis and PCOS and perimenopause. And then this cycle of like underfunding and underdiagnosis just continues. I think that's the real risk, is we're kind of sidelined yet again. It's about, better data. It's not just actually about having tons of data. It's actually just about having really, really juicy, good data that's, driven by women's needs.
Better data, smarter studies, more evidence, and more innovation. And in the end,
we can't go backwards. We can't be, we can't be driven by fear. In every industry, there are those who are, not doing things in the way we would all like them to do. However, I think it's about the ones who are doing it right, speaking up and speaking loudly.
Yeah.
For the rest of the women.
Totally. I think I want to lean in this. That way we're not just calling on women to just like trust me, bro. I think there's like a couple of things as an industry that we can do a little bit better. And it's a little tricky. I want to be out all recognize that although it doesn't feel privileged and it feels like it's been a very scrappy journey. I had the training to do this out of the gate, so I didn't have to rebuild it. So I will pause here. So I think there are two places in which we can facilitate greater trust as an industry, so that people feel confident in giving us that data so we can move forward. So I think the first one is policy. A really, really clear data service policy, data ownership policy, make sure it's publicly available, make sure, I know GDPR has like the terms of service at the bottom of the page, but the first thing pinned, we're not even active very much on Instagram, but like the first thing pinned on the MyNormative page is like data privacy. What does it mean and how does it impact you? Like that's the first thing you see when you look at MyNormative, so that you know what we do with data, how we manage data, etc. And then I think the other piece is to not rely on policy. So have the policy, and one of the things that we're super aware of, so like if MyNormative was ever acquired or there were ever bad agents who hacked into our data set, data structure is the other defense mechanism. So when you build a data set, build it in a way that is safe, so that it is kind of, if to be crude, so that it's bulletproof, right? So on an example internally for us, we have the user-facing interface, and that is the only place, and it's only on the user's phone, it's not in our data set, where the name of the person contributing data is associated with the data. Right? So on our side, inside our data set, those two pieces of information never come together. There's a lovely personalized user experience where those two things come through our kind of like data mechanisms and filter into the app, and they say, oh, hey, Cheryl, here's your information on what's going on. But on our side, the account details, i.e. who owns the account, what their password is, what email is associated with it, how to recover it, etc., that is stored in a completely different space than any of the health information. And so if, heaven forbid, politically something happened and the data set was subpoenaed, because unfortunately this isn't about like what would an ethical company would do with the data. It's like, what would the government do with the data if it was pursuing everyone who ever had a miscarriage, right? And so what we did on the inside from the get-go, and this would be my recommendation if you're starting from scratch, it's a little bit expensive to do retrospectively or retroactively, is to build it so that those two pieces of information, who it is and what happened, those two things should never ever touch in the data set from a best practices perspective. And so then it's not trust me, bro. It's this can't happen. Don't worry. Let me show you how I did that. And that I think is really the next evolution that we need to take if we want women and female identifying people to continue to contribute really vulnerable personal information in the geopolitical climate that we are in today. It has to move beyond this is for the betterment of society into, and it is safe for you, right?
Yeah. I'm also thinking of the when Roe v. Wade was overturned, one of the first responses from Clue, who is originally a period tracking app but a women's health app. They said they sort of lent into the stereotype from being founded in Berlin and said, we will take care of your data. We are of the highest standards in Europe with GDPR. We've got XYZ standards, and we will not give your data away, even if we're subpoenaed, right? And just saying, this is how trust comes as well. It's like through the values of the companies that you're working with, that you end up falling for the brand because you know that they're going to protect you, and they tell you, they reassure you. So I love that you've also got your data privacy pinned on your Instagram. Super important. I love that.
Yeah.
So I know we're running really tight on time. I want to get to sort of the last piece. So I want to talk around like insight to impact. I mean, we've talked quite some examples here, but maybe this is one that you want to answer around, like, how do you see the role of community in shaping what gets studied and solved?
Yeah, I think think this, this ties in a little bit with Danika's point there. I think it's so crucial in terms of, not that we're not going to share your data, but we're actually not able to, and always, I suppose, embedding that trust with your community. I think real impact, insight to impact starts with the community when they lead it, actually. And, I think that's always been not our motto, but like the Frendo users are not just data points, like they're actually the reason that we are asking better questions, and I think also when they know that, it's super important. They're being heard again. When people and patients are empowered to share what matters to them, then we start to see a shift in research, I think, as well, and women-led research and care. But for me, it always has to go back to the sufferer, the patient, the community. Otherwise, we are not learning, like we're not progressing. And I think, let's stop viewing them as, obviously data sets are really important, but they're actually people. They're how they're feeling, and with conditions like endometriosis, it varies so much from person to person. So really staying in contact with and researching your community and being led by them is I think super important, and will be where the impact will be driven.
It's actually, that's a really nice way of saying it, being led by your community. That's exactly what has happened at Hello Inside. So we launched in 2021, and actually we found that the majority of people using Hello Inside are women. And so we've readjusted and said it's not just about creating demand, but it's around saying, how do we help the people who are looking for this kind of service? How do we help these women in the most useful way, right? And actually, there are other glucose trackers out there. There are other services looking at metabolic health, but we're the only company in the world looking specifically at women's metabolic health as our mission to solve that gap. So being led by your community, absolutely love that. So we are coming to a close, 1 minute over, but I'm going to have one final takeaway, potentially, or reflection. So maybe in one sentence, what would you say to a woman who feels torn? So she wants to track her health data, but she's afraid of being exploited.
Do you want to go, Danika?
I mean, I think you might have something more interesting to say here, but I think, and I feel poorly because the answer for me is like, look for those technologies that are vetted for medical use, because that means that their data capture is cleaner. It means that it is regulated. It's not kind of at a consumer grade. And if you do, what I would say that goes directly against that advice, if medical grade isn't meaningful to you, is to then find those consumer grade technologies that are that have those very clear and clean, explicit like governance and policy implementations. But if you don't have the like, I have 2 babies under 3. So if you don't have time to be going around clicking on stuff, medical grade data capture is pretty safe, and you can kind of lean on that. If you don't love the user interfaces on those, because they're often awful, sorry, medical grade technology community, and the consumer grade just speaks to you a little bit more. I think you can find a small cohort of like-minded people that have very clear policy and governance on what they do to manage your data, and a little bit of digging will get you there.
I suppose I always believe that, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, be the CEO of your own body. I think we all deserve to understand our own body, and the right tools shouldn't take that power from you. They should actually be giving it back, right? And that's the difference, I suppose, with the right tools. I think protected data is actually, it's a core foundation for trust and and inclusion for us, and finally discovery into women's health. And I just hope that, you know, I hope we can get this right, and, you know, we don't just, not just fixing apps, we're kind of fixing systems and shifting systems. And that's really what I'm excited to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, if we're talking about tracking health and being afraid of being exploited, I mean, there's so much medical gaslighting going along for years and years and years. Even the misrepresentation and misreporting of a study in the late 90s that was released in 2001 around menopause and how hormone replacement therapy could help. It was misreported in the media, and then it's done a generation of disservice to women going through perimenopause because basically all the pharma companies withdrew and everything. So I would say we've already been exploited by being missed. And actually, you know, going forward, we have this huge, amazing opportunity to change the system. And Daryl, just to quote you, like, we won't go back. We can't go back. So we can only go forward. And I think that's a really nice note to leave on, you know, in terms of the whole story here, data to discovery, rethinking research in women's health. We can't go back. We will go forward, and we will go forward with this movement. And yeah, thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And to whoever is going to be listening in, whichever time zone you're in, thank you, and speak to you soon.
Bye, guys.